Hello and welcome to interest.co.nz. I'm Gareth Vaughan with another in our series of double shot interviews, and I'm here today with Tony Molloy QC. Now, Tony was the advisor to a parliamentary select committee that investigated the collapse of dozens of finance companies which cost retail investors billions of dollars. Now, thanks for making some time for us, Tony. You put together a report for the select committee which I wrote a story on recently, and I will link to from the story that goes with this interview. Now, you talked in there of how the finance company collapse was the inevitable consequences of at least 3 decades of unreadiness, unwillingness, and inability of regulators, law enforcers, the courts, lawyers, accountants to fulfil their roles with integrity. If we take that as a starting point, why do you think they failed to do this?
I think we've just lowered our standards enormously in the country over the last 30, 40 years. It's easy to say that, and I suppose the older and grumpier you get, you always think that, but things weren't like they were in the old days. But it's more than that here. We can look at it in areas outside the finance field. Apprenticeships and building standards got blown out of the way 30 odd years ago, and the result now is that we've got a leaky building problem that really makes the finance company problem pale into insignificance. 2 to 3 times the size of the finance company losses on the leaky buildings. Lots of people who didn't have leaky buildings but had alterations to their homes done in that period of the same thing. These days, if you want a plumber or an electrician, you very often find you're getting effectively a handyman, and if they can't replace the module, then they can't fix the thing at all. And it's really the same with the professions. The accountants have look at the record of the big accounting firms. It's positively dreadful, not just in New Zealand but worldwide. There's one of the big accounting firms behind every one of the big collapses. It was here too. One of the big accounting firms signed off on the Feltex accounts, where a term loan of some millions of dollars became repayable on demand and not over a term, simply because there'd been breaches of the covenants. And the accountants okayed the showing of this term loan as effectively still a term loan. And that, of course, meant that if you put your money in the finance company, once it had become an on-demand loan, the bank could have demanded that money at any stage, immediately, the day after you put your money in, and it all would have been swallowed and you'd have got nothing. And yet accountants can okay that, directors can okay it. It was common ground at the trial that the accounts didn't give a true and fair view. But then we had Parliament's role coming into it, because Parliament and the various government departments are just incessant tinkerers with legislation. They think they can legislate for everything, and they think they can legislate for every little detail, and they think they can improve legislation that's been proved over a long period, and that they can do it better. And in every case, they can't. They don't know what they're doing. In the case of the Feltex thing, they decided that they were going to make a much better Companies Act than the Companies Act 1955. So they put together a new Companies Act 1993, and the old Act had said basically, when it came to accounts, that directors have got to see to it that the company's accounts give a true and fair view, else they can go to jail. So they pulled that fairly simple provision out of the Companies Act and created a whole new thing called the Financial Reporting Act. And that act said in its long title that it's an act to see to it that accounts give a true and fair view and that they comply with applicable accounting standards. When they got to the offence provision corresponding with the one they were taking out of the Companies Act, they made the offence just not complying with applicable accounting standards and left the true and fair view out altogether. True and fair was the only darn thing that mattered, and the result was that these accounts went out. They were untrue, they were unfair, they were signed off, and it never should have happened in the first place, and it wouldn't have happened, notwithstanding the incompetence of the accountants and the auditors, if Parliament hadn't tinkered. It's this whole business of departments and members of Parliament thinking that they can do this job better than somebody who's an expert in the law. And the enduring legislation that comes to mind is the Partnership Act. That was about the 1890s. There was a Sir Frederick Pollock, who was an expert in equity, and he was asked to draft a Partnership Act, and he did it in about 40-odd sections. It's not a code. It's just there to be a framework so that people have got an understanding without being lawyers, and they can find their way around the main principles. The law isn't excluded, and the ordinary principles of law and equity still apply. That thing now is still going after 130 years or whatever it is. It's been adopted all around the world, including North America. It's governed billions and billions of business deals, and yet it's very simple. In 45 years I've had 3 cases on the Partnership Act, and in none of them was the law the problem. Sale of Goods Act was done by Sir Mackenzie Chalmers in England about the same time, and that also governed just every single sale transaction of buying a bar of chocolate through to buying a car. Around the world, just untold billions of transactions. You can write quite a small book on it and explain the whole act. Never caused any trouble. But, of course, that got tinkered away here, and we just go on. And the real problem these days is not the actual legislation that we had in place. It's the fact that people won't apply it. Departments don't understand it, they don't try to understand it, so they call for more law. And very often the call for more law is to disguise the fact that the departments haven't been doing their jobs in the first place. So, we're not a very smart country over the last 4 decades, and we're blowing untold wealth in not dealing with the law as it is, in trying to change it around. And every time you change the law, of course, you obliterate. Say if you change the Partnership Act now, you'd obliterate not just the simple act that has done so well, you'd obliterate a century and a half of litigation and reported case law that explicates the act and makes it very simple to understand for those who study it. So we've really just got ourselves into a bind. Rutherford said somewhere that we don't have much money, so we've got to think. Nowadays, I think the philosophy seems to be we haven't got much money, so we'll borrow more and we won't think anyway. And it's really not doing the country a hell of a lot of good.